Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about the LG CX 48-inch version. Now, I bought and paid for this with my own money, and it is notable that you can actually get the 55-inch version for a little bit cheaper. So today I'm going to be giving sort of a user review, not really a professional review, just kind of my use cases, how this is stacked up, what I do like about it, what I don't like about it so much. Now, my goal here is to highlight this product if it does sound like something you'd be interested in, but it's also to kind of shine a light on some of the stuff that's not so great, so that if it's deal breakers, you're at least aware of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into some specs and why I chose this particular monitor. So this thing is a full 4K HDR OLED panel. It is actually a TV, not a computer monitor, even though I am using it for a computer monitor, and we'll talk about my use cases in a second. This is also a 120 Hertz monitor, so you can play games up to 120 FPS on this. It also has a response time of about 1 millisecond, so it is incredibly fast. It is also G-Sync compatible, has HDR, good HDR most of the time, and is Dolby Vision capable. Now, as far as the options, they have a 48, a 55, a 65, and a 77-inch version of this monitor that I believe all have the same exact specs. Now, why I chose this monitor specifically was actually the first feature being the size. I wanted something this big, and like I said, you can get the 55-inch version, but the 55-inch version is quite a bit bigger than this one is, and I didn't want something quite that big. As you can see, this is already plenty for a desk. In fact, for my desk, I think this fits exactly perfectly for the size and the height of this monitor. Now, the 55 is definitely a better deal. This monitor was coming in right about, I think, $1,400 or $1,500. So that's what you're paying for with this. The color accuracy out of the box is supposedly pretty good, although I haven't been able to color calibrate it myself. I'd recommend visiting a website like Artings or Ratings to see their color calibration stuff, because their measurement equipment is much better than mine. Okay, so my use case is kind of dual-sided, and unfortunately they're somewhat conflicting with most monitors. I make videos for a living, so part of this is content creation, and the other part of this is gaming and general web browsing, watching videos, stuff like that. Now, the problem with this is that there are seemingly monitors on the market that are dedicated towards one or the other. If you get a great gaming monitor with a high refresh rate, usually the panel isn't as good as this is, or the color accuracy is trash, or the viewing angles are not always that good, or the brightness levels, yada, yada, yada. And on the flip side, you usually get 60 Hertz locked on a lot of the really pro displays. And a lot of pros have actually been recently switching to TVs like this one for their workflow to get a really good picture for not that much cash compared to just a couple years ago. Now, I unfortunately wanted the best of both worlds, and I also wanted something that was really, really big because it looks awesome. And you can take advantage of the full 4K resolution, which is what I shoot in. And it also happens to make an incredibly immersive gaming experience. So I wanted all of these things wrapped into one little bundle. And there are only a couple of options out there, and almost none of the computer panels that are 4K are also OLED. And if they are, they don't really have high refresh rates. There are really, really limited options for this. Now, this I found to be the best of all worlds, and had some sacrifices, but they were sacrifices I was willing to accept. So for gaming, I will say this: the general user experience is incredible. There has been a notable uptick in my ability through the added clarity and the added size and specificity of placement for competitive shooters like Destiny 2. Now, I was coming from a 100 Hertz ultra-wide monitor, which is pretty big, but having the advantage of the extra 20 Hertz and then G-Sync on top of that, which my old monitor did not do, and then the sheer size of it, actually allows for a really awesome shooting experience in a fast-paced shooter like Destiny 2. Now, I have Destiny up here. One of the problems with this monitor is that it has something called a game mode or a game launcher, which basically sets the response time to be as low as possible. It also goes into a custom color mode, which is not what you are setting. So right now I'm in the expert setting for, oh, it also has this thing, so that's fun. I'm in the expert bright room setting for most of my content and editing and just the normal stuff, but it will actually switch to the game mode. Even if you don't want it to, it will switch to the game mode when you switch into a game, when it actually detects a game. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So when you switch, you'll see it go into HDR, and then you'll see this at the top which is saying the instant game response is launched. Now, unfortunately, this message box will not go away, and it will pop up again when I Alt-Tab out of this. So there's no way to turn that off. And then the actual monitor itself is blacking out and switching over to the other game mode. And now it's back into the expert bright room setting, and then it will switch into the game setting. When I switch back into the game, it will black out again, and then you'll see the thing pop up for roughly 5 seconds or so. This is a little bit jarring. It's one of the downsides to this monitor that I wish wasn't there. I wish I could game at 120 hertz, 1 millisecond response time with G-Sync in the expert settings, because that's supposedly one of the most accurate settings that come out of the box, as it's yet to be calibrated. But I think what you have to do is go into the calibration settings for the game mode and calibrate the game mode to be as close to accurate as you can get it. That way you can have normal expert setting content that is in the expert mode, and then the game content is also the most color accurate that it can be. Now, the response time and the response smoothness of this is really just going to depend on your GPU's capability of running the actual game. So the monitor itself plays 120 hertz games just fine, and the response is actually fantastic. The smoothness is fantastic, as you would expect for 120 hertz. But if you have a lower end GPU or a lower end computer, you're probably not going to get that in most modern games. That's not a fault of this. It's actually a fault of your GPU, or not really a fault. It's a limitation of your GPU. So as you can see right now, we're getting in this menu about 116 FPS at 4K HDR all the way turned up. But when you get into more demanding areas, sometimes I'll see it drop down to like 105 when I'm actually in a environment. So one of the big benefits is the OLED, which in combination with the brights and the colors creates a very wonderful, like really wonderful gaming and just viewing experience. It is awesome. Okay, now one thing you can do in game is turn on the HDR. Now the HDR works great like 90% of the time, but it doesn't always work perfectly. And sometimes you'll get this weird glitch where the blacks are like super raised, like you're seeing right now, where they seem like misty almost and not quite black like they should be. And then some other weird quirks is that sometimes you're in an area where the HDR is not beneficial, and the dark areas are so dark because it's trying to push that dynamic range so far, and the OLED is, basically just turning off those areas. And so you're in this environment where you literally can't see shit. Like you can't see anything. And so I haven't quite decided whether I want to keep HDR on in general for the gaming experience or to turn it off. But it's not a perfectly flawless system. Unfortunately, there aren't too many flawless systems for HDR still, even in 2020. Now, something I didn't know was going to be that instant gaming response pop-up. It is quite annoying. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not what I would consider to be ideal. But I think all those compromises are worth the gaming experience because it is incredibly immersive. And going from a 35-inch ultra-wide 1440p 100 FPS monitor, this is like way more enjoyable than that. Even though that was a great gaming monitor, this is just way better. Okay, now the other side of my personal use case is the content creation side. And this whole video was edited using this, color corrected using this off of A6300 footage. I actually think it looks pretty decent, but it's not without its limitations. And part of them are the camera, the dynamic range of the camera. So this might be a little bit blown out, whereas the darks, which are normally hard to do, this kind of allows me to color correct really well in the low end, which is notoriously particularly difficult on the A6300 footage. I also have a GH5 and I switch cameras around a fair bit and try a decent bit of different footage and have, anyways, the point is, this is a wonderful editing monitor. One is like the raw real estate that you have, like the raw just viewing ability. So if you want to make something full screen, you see everything. You see all of that detail. You see all of the little fine pieces of it. And you can see the small changes that you make kind of exaggerated in this just because of the sheer scale and size relative to your seating position. And it makes everything just awesome to edit on. I have no complaints for the editing experience itself. Future Josh here, and forgot to mention this. One potential deal breaker actually for really, specific professionals is going to be the auto brightness setting, which is a very annoying feature of this that I actually, for some reason, didn't put in the script. But this TV has an auto brightness system that you cannot turn off. So depending on the scene itself, it will make it brighter or darker through AI, and there's no way to turn it off. This should be something that could be seen if we make enough noise through a software update, but so far it's been out, nobody has seemingly updated it. So if you're making content like this is like contentception, keep an eye on your scopes. That's generally good practice anyways, but with this specific monitor, that is something that luckily was already in my workflow, mostly because I wasn't using a color accurate monitor before, so having the scopes was basically a requirement to make any sort of color accurate footage. But this monitor, I'm constantly looking over there. LG, please, if you don't do anything else, just allow the color brightness to be turned off. Even if it has to dim a little bit compared to its max brightness to be turned off, I'm fine with the compromise, but I want my brightness to be set specifically. Now, one of the weird things about workflows in general, that isn't specific to this monitor nor a complaint, just an observation, but OLED is not standard, HLG is not standard, Dolby Vision is not standard, and even SDR, or standard dynamic range, is not standard, even though it says standard dynamic range. But, the content experiences all over the globe right now through your different phone settings, your iPads, your laptops, your TVs. Sometimes it's hard to make content that looks perfect on everything. And you can take a really wonderfully calibrated video and throw it on a bad monitor and it's going to look bad. And that's just kind of an overall complaint that I have with this. And I think something that interrupts me and a lot of other professionals is that when you're working on a video that has a particular look to it, on an OLED monitor, which is usually a lot more correct, it's hard to know what that's going to look like on average monitors. Even though I think when in doubt, the best way to go is to produce the best looking content on the most accurate stuff. If most people are going to be consuming your things on a phone or, on Instagram, like if you're editing pictures for Instagram, for example, almost all of it exclusively is going to be on things like iPhones, which are not going to have OLED displays that are this capable. So those are just a couple things to think about if you are considering a display like this. Now, a couple things that would make this perfect if LG is happening to watch this video. Custom color temperatures, like real specific color temperatures, changing by values of 50 or 100K would be awesome to dial in your whites exactly how they're supposed to look, especially if you shoot in a studio with specifically temperatured Kelvin lighting. Mostly because I think the options are like cool, warm 1, warm 2, and warm 3. And that doesn't really tell you anything. Or it's like for potential settings for your white balance. And then you have to go in and specifically customize the blues and then the reds and yada, yada, yada. But having a sort of, a monitor that is this capable in terms of a panel and not having custom color temperatures is a bit of a missed opportunity, I think. The viewing angles are overall very good, but something you will want to be aware of is the whites of this will slightly shift towards blue as you get towards the edges. Now, when you change your perspective to be more in front of those edges, you can see that they're actually not blue, but it's just a slight alteration in viewing angle because the panel relative to your eyes from the center to the sides is, you're getting slightly into that color shifted side viewing angle, even though the side viewing angles are still pretty good. For color correction people out there, one thing to be aware of is the panel is very reflective, so lights and your wall color are going to influence the color of what you're looking at, so just be aware of that. I would recommend, if possible, editing in a dark environment. Okay, so my conclusion for this. Am I happy with this? Hell yeah. I think this is probably the best $1,500 that I've spent on my computer experience. It has been the largest and most immersive jump up into the world of content creation and gaming that I think I've ever made. I think it's probably the best, most immersive $1,500 that I have spent. It is not without its problems though, and there are a couple things that I do wish were better. That game response can go F itself. I don't like it. It is straight up just annoying. But short of a couple small minor things, I think that the OLED, the size, the full 4K, the response time is fantastic. The refresh rate or the hertz is exceedingly better than most other TVs. This thing is a win on almost every front, and the places where it's not a win, I think I'm totally willing to make the compromise. Okay guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll drop links to everything that I was talking about in the description down below. And until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off. Bye.